We're on.
All right.
You lead. You tell me. So lead the way.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot has happened. It's one of those weeks they say where decades can happen in 1 week, right?
Was
Some
that
decades go
was
by
another
without.
Vladimir Lenin quote? I think.
There you go. We'll have some Russian
Some
authors.
and there are decades in which nothing happens, and then there are weeks in which and then there are weeks with when decades happen. Vladimir Lenin,
Sure, that was
right?
attributed to Vladimir Lenin,
I
right? I'm
think
gonna
it.
butcher a bunch more quotes after Russian authors, anyways. I'm good for that, especially when I get into the Solzhenitsyn.
Weeks, decades. I watched Styx's segment and I said I'm not using um yeah, it was Vladimir Lenin. I'm not using
DuckDuckGo,
DuckDuckGo anymore.
right? They
So
capitulated.
I'll
So,
use Bing as my default and then I thought of this. This is funny. If you want to test your browsers for spooky shit, spooky games in the browsers, you know what you do? Is you type in this is what you do. If you want to see if your search is manipulated by the government, if there's government influence, let's
okay,
say.
I'll bite.
Okay, so here's what you do. You put CIA document 1035 960 or just put CI, don't even put document. Put CIA 1035 960. I know I've told you about this and see what you get.
Oh, sure, right.
Bing
Mockingbird
is
or something.
actually Bing, which is Microsoft. They're actually so if you go to Bing and they give you the document in PDF form.
So this is
Oh,
kind of a litmus
maybe
test.
this is like a transcription of it, but this is the document because the original document is like an old school document that's kind of hard to read. It's on an old typewriter, but they give you the original document. So I haven't read through this, but CIA document 1035-960 is when they say their concern
Now
is
I
that
forget, is
people.
this Warren Commission or is this about Mockingbird, Project
It is
Mockingbird?
about Mockingbird because
That's what I thought.
this document went to and down here in the body of the document you'll see that they are instructing their assets in the media, in the domestic media. See, this was
Yeah,
uncovered
they
during
as in what, the State Department or the Department
the
of Defense?
CIA. This is for a CIA document. This is not the original. This is transcribed because the original is kind of hard to read. But
So
this
it's
is where
redacted,
they're in. This
declassified.
is. Hmm.
So it's the declassified
It
version.
was declassified during the Church Commission, right?
Senator Church.
Mm-hmm. And they were. It was a dispatch. This, I think, the actual term for this document is you would call it CIA dispatch 1035-960. Let me turn down the gain. I see a little red here. I'm trying to keep this bar in the yellow, and it gets kind of in the red. Okay, how's that? That sounds better.
That's good.
Okay,
Now,
so
now, did this set up a FISA court? Wasn't that the main goal of the Church Commission for oversight for these
well,
intelligence communities?
they
I don't want
I
to like
yeah,
paraphrase
no,
Craig.
hold on.
I'm just trying to act like I'm smart in the know.
Mm, Definitely that was one of the recommendations and the FISA process came out of the Church Commission. As far as I know, I don't feel like really looking it up right now, but I'm pretty sure off the top of my head that it came from that was the whole
Sure.
purpose. After Watergate, it became apparent that the FBI was completely corrupt, and so that's kind of like the
Publicly
impetus
known.
for the. Hmm?
Yeah, and it was commonly known, more widespread. There was more dissent. There was more questioning official narratives. So that was a
Hmm.
problem at that time for um,
Because
the
back then
the
the
CIA.
left, back then the left was against the intelligence agencies. They were anti-authority, unlike now. But yeah, the church. This was the document where they basically it's more properly called CIA Dispatch 1035-960. It's a dispatch they sent out to their agents in the field, and some of these agents in the field were actually editors at newspapers, or they were working within domestic newspapers, domestic media, or they were closely associated and closely affiliated with those. So this was proof that CIA had assets in the media, and there were actually some agents in the media, and this is telling them, hey, any journalist. So this is telling the CIA agents who are working within the domestic media, either directly or indirectly.
Okay, in
that
like the early 70s was when they were telling them this. This was taking place during the Church Commission during the 70s?
No. This document was written in the 60s. It was uncovered during the Church Commission in the 70s, mid to late 70s. So it was already 10 years old by the time this became declassified. It was right after the Warren Report came out. The Warren Report, of course, was the report on JFK's assassination. And even at the time, in the 60s, the court of public opinion did not buy
Hold
this.
Hold on, I'm going to put my
document.
doggy outside. He's going to start whining. Barking. Go.
That's all right.
Go. I have these headphones. Right, so in response to the Warren Commission, of course.
The CIA, and then there were people in the media at the time who were saying, we don't buy the Warren Report. We think there's something else to this. And
right,
even
because they had some incentive back then to speak the truth. There was a demand, there was a public outcry or something. Is that why it was incentivized to have them be real journalists and print what might actually be happening? Is that something?
No, it's just because of what was popular at the time. Now, you had not many mainstream journalists were the same then as now. As a matter of fact, they were probably more toe the line. But there were journalists, because back then, the media was much less consolidated among huge corporations. There was more small media, especially within within radio and even television. You had local news stations that were investigating. They had journalists at local news stations. Local newspapers were investigating the Kennedy assassination. There was all sorts of editorialists, editors coming out saying, I don't believe the Warren Report. And some of them even said, none of the mainstream guys, like your Walter Cronkite's always towed the line and did basically whatever, the establishment wing of the Democrats, more often than not, wish them to do. But if you go to like the local newspapers, there were actually muckrakers that worked in New York Times and Boston Globe and Chicago Tribune and LA Times. Like now there are no muckrakers in any of those. And they were suggesting that, some of them were even suggesting that the government was involved somehow, some way with the Kennedy assassination. So
and these
CIA,
were op-eds that. How did this come about? They were gaining traction. Were these op-eds that were coming out, and there was like public interest for this? Mm-hmm. I want to feel like there was some kind of outcry, because
it's just public interest.
Yeah.
These guys were making statements on the record, on their papers, and even on the radio. I would say most of this kind of.
Sure.
Most of this kind of discussion occurred on the in the newspapers, and they were.
Is this where the Daniel Ellsberg maybe come to mind, or Bernstein at this time? Were they public heroes? Were they starting to be?
Not when the document was written, because this document was written in the 60s. They were heroes in the mid to late 70s when Daniel Ellsberg. No, same generation. It's just that. About 5 years. This document was written 5 years before, about 1967. Another reason there was so much, dissent on Kennedy's assassination was the fact that you had the Vietnam War, and people were starting to get pissed off at that. In 1966-67 timeframe, you start to see public opinion really start to turn on Vietnam.
Sure.
So
basically, just dissent. That was the problem. for the establishment at that time.
The problem for the CIA and for the government was people were actually the biggest problem. Two problems. They were because people were, you know, journalists who were respected journalists were saying that the government was lying about the Warren report, that the Warren report was full of shit, basically. And also, there were respected journalists in many newspapers who were saying it's possible the government was involved in the Kennedy assassination. Okay. And so the CIA said, we can't. So in this document,
Another thing, this is where they invented up a term. Isn't this where the term
they didn't invent it.
Was conjured up?
It wasn't conjured up. I used to think that it wasn't. It was just used. I mean, people called people conspiracy theorists long before that, but that's what this this document was about. This document was basically instructing CIA agents
instructing the media through the CIA to use these terms, like to discredit people and send out disinformation.
To call anybody who questioned the Warren report a conspiracy theorist. That's what they basically did. So this was a letter directly from the CIA to people in the field who were in the media or working for the media, telling them that any journalists that suggest that the Warren report is a lie or that the government was involved, you are instructed to use terms like conspiracy theorist, because we can't allow people to think that the government was involved in the Kennedy assassination or that the government is not telling the truth about the Kennedy assassination. So that was Operation Mockingbird. This is like the crown document, because this document proved. Now this again.
How appropriate that this information on Project Mockingbird on how to be deceitful to the general public is your litmus test for looking up off of a search engine to see to the extent that they will allow sensitive materials to be available to the general public.
Say that again. I'm sorry. I'm
talking about your litmus test, bringing it back to the original point before the rabbit hole.
That's what the original document. That's what the original document would have looked like. That's the original document declassified. Right.
You'll never bring this up on Google. You're not going to bring this up on Google.
Exactly.
And now DuckDuckGo, because they capitulated.
Yeah. If you go to Google right now, let's see what Google does. So when we looked it up on Bing, which is Microsoft's search engine, we got the document very easily. When we go to Google, not to say Bing is going to be without influence, but this is kind of a litmus test to find search engines that are just overtly controlled by the state. And then we go CIA. Let's see what happens. Because last time I tried on Google, the first thing it gives you is like a news article.
They try to obscure it.
It may have changed. We'll see. But I might be proven wrong.
What is it called again for the folks at home? The CIA document? 1035
960. 1035 960. Okay. It gives you a link that you have to subscribe to get access.
Oh, just put your name on a database. That's good. Good.
Here he goes.
Google and do that. I can just use my credentials.
So, marked psych, destroy when no longer needed. So Google used to give you crap. Let's see what's going on here.
And this isn't like classified material. This is straight up.
I know in the past Google maybe
public domain, FOIA requested public domain or public information.
This may be this is not it, is it? That's not it. I don't know what this is. See, they don't give you as direct. It's not as good of a search result. It used to be that I couldn't get to CIA 103560 on here. See, it has conspiracy. it has some. It has it now. It didn't have it before. I don't know if that's maybe because I searched for it before, but I remember looking for it before. So maybe it's not a good litmus test. So much for that. But at least we talked about 1035-9 1035 960. That was the and the thing about the whole situation with Operation Mockingbird, people will say, "Oh, well, that was in the 60s, the 50s, whatever.
Oh
That was a
no,
long
no,
time
it
ago."
was reinstated under Obama. I think 2011, I
No,
believe.
it never ended. It was never stopped. You see, when Congress asked, because
So
who
they
guess who
started
was
doing it in the open.
the CIA director at the time when this
Of
was
when what?
uncovered?
Tell me again. What era? The
When this
CIA
was
director
uncovered,
J. Edgar
when,
Hoover.
no, he
No,
was FBI.
not the CIA. It would have been a Bush maybe then. That's right. Edgar Hoover
Yes,
was FBI. It
H.W.
would have been
Bush in
HW.
1977. H.W. Bush was the CIA director, and Congress asked him to do something about it, and he said, "I promise we're not going to do that anymore." And there was never any
Aw,
oversight. No one ever looked
of course
into
not.
whether they did or didn't. It's impossible to have oversight over the CIA because the CIA doesn't even let members of Congress know what they're doing. Only the Intelligence
You're
Committee,
on a need to
which
know
are
basis.
people who the CIA wants and allows to see what they're doing, are the ones that are allowed to over have any sort of. And the CIA only feeds the Intelligence
Oh, you
Committees
mean
in the
leak? No,
House and
they.
the
I
Senate
think they leak occasionally, right? Don't they have a
on
tendency for things
purpose,
to
but
leak out? Oh
they
no.
only release the secrets that they only release information they want people to
Expedience.
hear. If any member of Congress went to the CIA right now and said, "I want to know what your involvement in Ukraine was," it doesn't matter what member of Congress. It doesn't even matter if the president came up to him and said, "What's going on in Ukraine?" They would tell them to fuck off. Okay, that there is no
Or give
oversight
them to run
whatsoever.
around.
So when the Operation Mockingbird was uncovered, Bush said, "Okay, we won't do it anymore. Is that enough?" And Congress was like, "I guess, because there's nothing else they can do." So I'm yelling into the
Right?
thing
To
here.
try to save face. Yeah, they try to
Hmm.
pretend like there's some
So,
transparency, or they have
stupid
some
people.
type of pull
Hmm?
in the intelligence communities.
Hmm?
Well, some of them probably these politicians probably think they're in the club, like Schumer saying that the intelligence communities have 7 ways to sundown to take you out, like he's one of the good old boys.
No, he was actually telling the truth for once, almost for that was a
Freudian
rare
slip.
moment. Yeah, it was a Freudian slip, is what that was. I guess he felt really comfortable.
Yeah,
He
confidence.
must have felt really comfortable hanging out with Rachel Maddow, and he thought that he was not being recorded or something. Who knows? But that was a shocking thing to say on national television. Thank God, most people, are just too their cognitive dissonance kicked in, and they see that on MSNBC and they can't process it.
Or they like to
You
think they're
know.
part of the club with the elites as well. That they would be able to rub elbows and
Mm-hmm.
laugh at the same jokes about how elite and arrogant they are.
For sure. That's like kind of the point of tribalism, you know. So what else? What were you looking into? Were you looking into something, or what's going on?
Uh, Mostly current events, I guess. Ukraine. I figured we could start an organic conversation and just like jump right in.
Yeah,
I
I
guess
mean,
you're. Are you following what's going on in the media? Because I'm sure there's some world leaders, some narratives out there that are completely pure and honest with us about the
well,
narrative, right?
the big thing yesterday was that Rush. Well, then first there
There's a lot
was.
of things. I would jump right in, but I don't know if you want to go
Go
down
ahead.
the rabbit hole of the biological weapons with,
I know a
you
little
know,
bit about that. What I see is the Russia's claiming that
yesterday.
they were bioweapons labs, and the United States is claiming they weren't. But the United States is
Last week
admitting
they
that they're.
did.
Hmm?
Last week they claimed that they didn't know anything about this.
No, they didn't
When
know anything. Go ahead.
No, when Marco Rubio had questions, what Victoria Nunez, that's another name, Victoria
Newland.
something,
Newland.
Victoria Newland, and what's her position again? Isn't she like a national security advisor or something?
She's basically
She's more relations.
She's basically a State Department swamp creature. She was actually she was the one. She's really the architect of the Maidan coup.
Oh,
She
I didn't
was
know she had
she
history with the
was
conflict
she
that far.
was the person. She was the person. Okay, here we go.
Because in that interview, Rubio, I don't have much trust in him. I would say he's got to be a neocon the way he was leading her, leading her into the question, saying, now if there's a biological attack, it's definitely from Putin, right? It's definitely like finishing her sentences while he's supposed to be asking her
He's
questions,
so full of shit. He's the worst. He's one of the worst
leading
senators.
the
He's one of
witness.
the worst Republicans. But
Yeah,
Victoria Nuland was the architect or a very deeply involved in the Maidan coup and working with the right wing organizations to, orchestrate the coup and collaborating and even having her picture taken with members of neo-Nazi
I was gonna
militias.
say when you say far and Korean, talk about the A's Italian, right? Those type of far right, not
Hey
neo
Don, they
Nazis and
changed their.
stuff
That's the
that they were
ones.
working
That's
with back then.
what's that?
Well, during the Maidan coup, that was in Kiev and Maidan Square, and these were neo Nazis, right? That we had propped up at that time that we were supporting.
Yeah, we were supporting them covertly and overtly. Really, we were actually giving. I mean, there was a Congress admitted that they were giving weapons to giving aid to neo Nazis, and there was actually a congressional.
Right.
There was a act of Congress, a bill, a bill to stop aiding Nazis. That was in 2018, I think. Stop giving aid to Nazis.
Mainstream news, yeah. And they were opposing the democratically elected leader at the time, Yanukovych, in 2014.
Yeah.
These neo Nazis. So it's really complicated. I know we're going to get into some deep dives and psychological operations out there.
So
I don't know. Is
Victoria
there like
Nuland,
definitive proof?
have
Okay,
you ever
let's go
heard
over
this?
her.
Have you ever heard the leaked phone call of Victoria Nuland?
HCA Florida Healthcare. We show up for you.
Can you hear the audio on the screen from the computer?
When you're a high-ranking
No, I
official
don't.
talking
No,
about
I can read it
diplomatic
though.
efforts
I can
in
describe
Ukraine, the last thing you want to do is drop your
That's
guard.
Victoria Nuland.
I'll be able
That
to
would be
look back
great, I think, to
afterwards,
help
and
glue
I'll
this
be able to
thing,
hear
and
it
have
from
the
the
UN
audio,
help
just not
glue it.
while I'm on the
And,
stream.
the EU.
But
Fuck
that
the
is
EU.
exactly what reportedly happened between U.S. Assistant
This is not a
Secretary
good
of
one. There's a whole thing here. I think it's this one. So no,
Oh yeah, Secretary of State. That's what she is. I don't know why I'm getting it twisted.
recorded. This is it. This is the conversation. So that's right here. Recorded conversation between Assistant Secretary of State
What do you
Victoria
think?
Nuland and Ambassador.
I think we're
Pryor.
in play. The Klitschko piece is obviously the complicated electron here, especially the announcement of him as Deputy Prime Minister. And you've seen some of my notes
So in
on
this leaked phone
my
call, I'm
audio
not
still
going to
on?
listen to the whole thing,
troubles in
but this is where it's just after the actual riot that basically forced Yoshenko to step down, and her and Jeffrey Pratt, the ambassador to Ukraine from the United States, are basically talking about who they want to be the next president of Ukraine. And they're talking about who they want to rule Ukraine. So they're basically sitting there planning out who's going to invade Ukraine. And then she says in this phone call, she says, fuck the EU, because the EU didn't really back the coup like they wanted it to. So Victoria
That is
Nuland
crazy.
Victoria Nuland was one of the big players in the 2014 Maidan coup. And it's really crazy that she was just on in front of Congress the other day. And then that's when she admitted that the United States did have biolabs in Ukraine and that she was concerned about the Russians getting a hold of the materials
Right.
in the
That's how the
biolab.
narrative
Why would you
always
be
changes.
concerned? Why would you be and then everybody was like, there's no
Dismissive at first.
no it was, well, let's watch it. Let's see if we can find it.
Well, they dismissed it, then they lied about it, and they said, yeah, there is, and it's for. I think she tried saying that it was, for not weaponized use like biologicals for studies and research,
Here we go.
non-military.
Okay, let's see. What's
If she couldn't
Forbes?
get cooperation from the EU, that's just another example. Even back then, because they're kind of scattered on their allegiance, and who's really behind it. They're not really in charge. I heard today also that an interesting thing that Poland has these aircraft jets, and they're not like, I guess the Department of Defense is saying that no, we don't want this action, while the State Department is trying to antagonize, and they're not really in
Yeah.
agreement right now with who's in charge at the moment, which is a little bit scary.
Yeah, that's what happens when you have no leadership at the head of things. That's why, people say
It's
president's not.
embarrassing.
Yeah, that's why people say having the president's not really that important because he's not all that powerful. But it's
Right.
very important, regardless of how much power the president actually has, which he actually has a lot, is to
Yeah.
have a person who is able to take charge, because otherwise you end up with different departments doing different
Sure, doing
things.
different things, right? Like the
And
Pentagon is saying, "Fuck you,"
that
like you
happens
guys are
anyway.
nuts.
That happens anyway. There's always like fucking
Sure.
drama going on between agencies. But when you have a strong leader, a strong president, then you're not going to have this fucking total chaos like we're having now.
No, they have random ideologues in these positions, cabinet positions.
Hmm.
Random ideologues in the State Department, like that are just, maybe they fell all in with the Russiagate nonsense, and that's just a narrative, an angle that they've been working, and they probably had this thing at least. Victoria, what's her last name again?
Newland.
Newland, Victoria. I keep thinking
You're
Nunes.
fine.
Victoria Newland. It
Mhm.
doesn't really roll off the top of your tongue. But yeah, it seems like she's had an interest in Ukraine, or at least advocating for U.S. interests and NATO interests too, which she's not. I just found out a minute ago that the EU, not NATO, but the EU is not really on board with a lot of their agenda there. So I think everybody has known that poking the bear and antagonizing Russia little by little has been a bad idea, and a lot of these
But they
intelligence
couldn't help
communities,
it.
like you guys, are nuts. They couldn't help it,
They
from
couldn't
my
help it
understanding.
because the money is too good. It's the money. It's the fact that every time you bring a new country into NATO, that means weapons manufacturers can sell a lot of
Right.
money.
They have a
Building
criteria on how many
contractors,
weapons they have to have, and what type of military they have to have.
and those are primarily, there's three major companies in NATO that produce a lot of weapons. United States, actually the second is Germany, and then Britain makes some, and I'm sure France makes some too. But all these countries have weapons industries. Now, none of them. Now, Germany has actually a huge weapons industry that is very powerful, but the United States still has the most powerful weapons industry. So that's the main reason. That's why NATO didn't do what it should have done and disband after 1991, because there was already too many people who had made a killing and were continuing to make a killing off of NATO. There was too much political influence and corruption seeping into all of these, in not only the United States political system, but also the German political system and the English political system, the British political system. So that's why NATO never disbanded
Really
like it should
disbanded.
have, because in the 90s, there was no talk of Russia being a threat. Yet throughout the 90s, we
As we
kept NATO
expanded,
going.
Yeah, we didn't keep
Which
our promises on not expanding an inch to the east.
And guess
Also,
who that
so
was?
as we expanded, we were going eastward.
That was all Clintons. Clintons were the biggest ones doing that,
Yeah.
expanding NATO. So NATO should have been disbanded right after Soviet Union, collapsed. There was no reason for it, no actual reason for us to have NATO. But that's what happens to any institution. An institution comes about and it grows and grows until it becomes parasitic, and until
Yeah.
you can't shake it. A nation state that creates an institution for whatever reason eventually can't get rid of it, whether it wants to or not, because it
Mm-hmm.
becomes too big, too powerful, and too many people have a vested interest in that institution.
Sure.
So that's what always
And they can
happens.
just put taxpayers on the hook as well. They can just,
Exactly. If you
use
can
our influence. They can make deals with, other foreign nationals, and put American taxpayers on the hooks while they have their slush funds and their money laundering organizations, and you know any way you can imagine it. Like you're saying, parasitic in nature and grows with corruption until it implodes on itself.
until the government or the nation state that funds it can no longer fund it, which will eventually happen in the United States. The fact that the problem with the United States right now is we're in a sort of debt free fall, a debt spiral, and we're going to crash very soon, and it's going to be very hard. But the government cannot stop deficit spending. The government cannot stop deficit spending because the more it spends, the more power and influence it exerts. Everywhere it spends money, that's power and influence. That's money that the politicians can use to get favors from other people. So it's unstoppable. Doesn't matter who is president, who's in Congress. The whole system has to crash down. That's all that can happen, and it's happened. Have you ever heard of Ray Dalio?
I don't know. Tell me. He's got an interesting story.
He's a finance guy, but he came up with something called the big cycle, which is the rise and fall of empires, and how an empire grows and grows, and it almost always goes down a debt spiral. It always starts spending way too much money than it has in order to keep the empire, in order to keep the status quo going, and that debt spiral eventually brings about its collapse. And then at some point, usually the decline of an empire is marked by wars, because the empire has to fight wars in order to maintain its economic supremacy.
Right, its influence.
What they want is the economic supremacy. What an empire strives to do is be economically supreme to other countries, so it can get the most money, so people can. This is the basis of it.
They can have persuasion.
It uses the military to do that. So the Dutch Empire. So Ray Dalio talks about the big cycle. There's a video online, and the Dutch Empire grew, formed colonies all over the world, and then it started getting into wars with everybody. Before that, the Spanish Empire did the same thing. And eventually, in order to keep the empire intact, they had to start printing money, which was basically deficit spending back then. So they were printing money, minting money, just like we're doing. And that brought about the collapse eventually. And then there's always a turning point where, the nation state loses a decisive battle. And that's coming for us. It's coming. It wasn't Afghanistan. Afghanistan was embarrassing. But there will come a point where we will fight a war with somebody, or maybe multiple people, and we will lose. And then
with
that's
the arrogance
when
of these people, they don't seem to be able to understand how to back down and how to use any type of finesse. A lot of people that want to just crush their political opponents and shame and cancel, and they're just used to getting their way by freaking out and claiming that they have the moral high ground. And in a situation right now, I feel like we're starting to lose influence because Biden's kind of a joke, and a lot of this vitriol for Russia and this hypocrisy that goes with it. I think people aren't taking the time to realize that we're not coming from a position of strength right now. We're losing negotiating power. Russia's making a mockery out of us while we have this. We've been called by multiple nations like the empire of lies. Like the whole narrative is breaking down. We're losing trade partners. Other nations aren't partnering, aren't standing up for the sanctions on Russia anymore because they're going to operate at their own self-interest, and we just don't have the persuasion and influence that we think we do. And I think the
That's what
sharks are going to
happens.
start to smell blood, right,
Hmm.
and start circling.
Well, that's what Afghanistan. That's what that was the big problem with Afghanistan, is it was such a display of incompetence that other countries see that, and they say, "Hey, now's the time to if we now's our time to act."
Yeah.
They're waiting in the shadows all these years. But I would argue that the United States started to decline maybe in the 90s or 2000s, but it was a very slow decline at that point. We're on the steeper end of the angle. So if you look at a if you look at a if it looks if it what was that? There was a geometric, or like, what is that? Hyperbolic, not hyperbolic. There's like if you see a big curve, like a bell curve, okay, like a big curve. So we're on the other side. We're well on our way to the decline. So we started to decline maybe, I would say at least 2030. I would say maybe Iraq war, maybe a little before that, and then
Sure.
the dot
When
com
we start
bubble.
around that time, yeah, we started printing money excessively.
Mhm.
That was during the repeal of Glass-Steagall. Also, that had a lot to do with Wall Street and not distinguishing between commercial banks and investment banks and allowing them to speculate
Well,
and get bailed out.
we didn't really start printing a lot of money until 2009, 2010, after the great financial crisis. So I would say, to correct myself, the we so we may have started to decline. The decline started before that, but the decline was definitely apparent by the time of the great financial crisis, because then we started to print money to keep the system going, and that is what every empire does. The Spanish
Deficit spending.
Empire, the Spanish Empire did it, then the Dutch Empire did it, then the British Empire did it, and now we're doing it. Okay, so
Yeah.
these are things that happen to every empire since the world became a global, but since we had a global sort of
Of course, yeah.
scene going. So you can say, going back to the Spanish Empire would have been the first sort of global empire, and then came the Dutch, and then came the British, and now it's us. So we're not even at the beginning of the decline. We're at the point of no return. We're at the point where the decline is so
Yeah.
steep we can't go back uphill. There's no way to stop it, in my opinion. Some people, Ray Dalio argues there is a way to stop it. I would argue you can't. You can't stop it, because
Yeah.
if a herd of wildebeest cannot be turned on the right path, okay, they're going to go
Yeah,
off the
and,
cliff.
and it's terrifying because war is like the only path. That's like the only mindset that
Hmm.
they have is throwing the United States throwing our muscle around and trying to persuade other nations the way that we have been doing and failing as we're losing influence. So, and that seems to be the only tactic they have to fall back on after
But
bullying.
maybe they know we're on the decline. I mean, here's the thing about it is, a lot of these people that call the shots, they understand history. They understand it. They don't want Americans to understand history. They want to make sure that the American population is as dumbed down as possible. But maybe they know that the decline is inevitable. They're going to use this as an excuse to divert more. Well, they're already doing this. Look at it this way. Here's what I kept asking myself. Okay, so if you know that Ukraine has no way of winning the war against Russia, which I think everybody should understand that. I mean, dumb normies don't understand it, but I'm sure the people in Washington, the people in the Pentagon, they understand. They're not going to say it on. I think some people have even alluded to that in public, some public figures. But so
Yeah.
let's just assume that most of them know there's no way Ukraine's going to win this war, and the United States is not going to enter the war. Ukraine is going to lose probably by the end of the month. Okay, Russia's going to exert they're going to force terms on Ukraine.
Yeah.
Then why are we sending them aid and weapons?
Right, that's what's a little scary because you're saying there's no way there's no way Ukraine would be able to fend off Russia. That's without our
No way.
involvement. That's without these clandestine operations going on. Like when it starts to look eerily similar when we see these bioweapons research facilities and all these campaigns of lies and propaganda out there, disinformation and deception, to try to make it seem like, our allies are like fighting for their lives, and the Ukrainian people unanimously want our help, and all this propaganda out there. When it starts to look like more like the State Department wants us to intervene, um, these are the people that are responsible for coming up with fake chemical weapons attacks in Syria to blame on Assad. Like, as soon as he starts seeming like he's putting our protests, our rebels down, our allies, our rebels that we fund and support, in order to, push regime change and have our allies in place and Western friendly interests that we have that are going to work with us. It just seems like there's always some type of surprise, like false
Yeah, but
flag event or this.
it's easier to attack a country like Syria, which didn't have chemical or nuclear weapons, than convincing the American population to send their sons and daughters to fight the Russian army and potentially
Right.
putting the entire world in danger of nuclear annihilation. So I don't even think a false flag of
Well,
that
not for
sort.
direct military intervention, but don't you think they would have plans? They just need a declaration from Congress to send troops, some type of intervention, some proxy conflict that they can start, and the style of the United States, like the low intensity conflicts, nation building
Well, a lot of
exercises,
people, yeah, a
because they
lot of
have
people.
so much interest over there in Ukraine. So many politicians have children as a state that Ukrainian energy firms, the sitting on the board of directors, and the Clinton Foundation slush funds. Just so much money and influence, and it's been kind of a cesspool. So like, I don't think they want to walk away from that and lose influence to Russia right now. So I think that's a lot of the reason behind the
I've heard
massive
that.
propaganda campaigns.
I've heard that argument among lots of people. They want to turn it into a forever war, a proxy war. However, I wonder if once Russia gets control of Ukraine,
Right.
I don't think they're going to be able to crack that nut. I mean,
Because
it's not
Russia's
like
making a mockery out of them. I don't think that's what they expect. I think they want to prolong this, insurrection in Ukraine, keep funding them, keep giving them weapons and support, so they can push this conflict. So there is some kind of funny business. I feel like Russia's, they've already surrounded Kiev. They have their little cauldron in effect. They set up their humanitarian corridors. They're doing everything. Do you hear about this? How they're actually, I guess they're working with the UN right now. They're setting up communications, and they're setting up for negotiations. They just had a deal with Zelensky that was rejected because the Russians, I guess, they're in a position to negotiate on their terms, and they're trying to end this conflict quickly rather than like dragging it out to have, like they have a clear goal in mind. And the West, it seems like, Americans especially, they're trying to like obscure this, objective of the Russians, where they want to have Crimea acknowledged, and they want Donetsk and Luhansk from the Donbass region. They want these regions that have the Russian diaspora. They want them to be acknowledged by Ukraine after the ceasefires, and at that time, the Minsk agreements. Remember, I'm throwing a lot of things out there, but I think a lot of this we have, because we haven't chatted and we haven't really talked about. But I think Putin's objectives are clear, and I know in Russia there's more censorship than we have here to an extent, but at least
probably.
I heard on the Kremlin website, though, you can look at all of Putin's speeches with world leaders. That's where I was listening today, and I just found out that Putin's actually having discussions with the United Arab Emirates and the Saudi princes, and
They're
Biden is
upset.
being Biden's being shut out from these conversations. He
That's
has to go
because
through,
we're trying to talk to Iran and Saudi Arabia.
yeah,
That's a deal
and
breaker for
Venezuela.
Saudi Arabia. But
Yeah,
what
what a
I
mess,
think
right?
is, going back to the original like thesis you were making about United States, turning this into a insurrection, a real insurrection. Once Russia takes over or wins the war and enforces terms, I guarantee you one of those terms is going to be a permanent presence of Russian military, Russian intelligence in Ukraine. And the United States, like, think about this. If we could start an insurrection in Ukraine with the Russians ruling over it, then we would be able to start an insurrection in Russia, wouldn't we? And it would probably be an act of war at that point, because Russia would claim, I would think that they would make Ukraine a very buttressed fortress in terms of United States covert operations. That's what I would think. They would ensure that covert ops of the United States, money, everything, all of the influence peddlers, whether it's the NGOs or the intelligence agencies, will not be allowed into Ukraine once Russia forces terms. So I don't buy that. My point is the reason they're sending weapons funded by the taxpayer and all sorts of other aid, who knows where that aid is going, by the way, funded by the taxpayer to Ukraine.
$50 billion.
Even though,
today, right?
even though Ukraine has no chance, they did something like 13 billion today, but even though Ukraine has no chance of winning, the only reason is they see it as another opportunity to embezzle money from the American taxpayer and send it to people, God knows who in Ukraine. That money will be then laundered somewhere else. Okay, this is more corruption.
And they don't want their gravy train interrupted.
It's the last opportunity for them to use Ukraine as a money laundering pit. Okay, that's why they are doing this. It's the last opportunity for them to send weapons to Ukraine. And it's not just the United States. European countries are doing it too. Okay,
and that's one quote from Putin that I guess you could say was accurate, where he said, if the U.S. and NATO are such good allies of Ukraine, why has their situation deteriorated after the fall of the Soviet Union, after NATO started, trying to help?
And I'm sure the Ukrainians, if we had an honest poll, they would, and they could speak freely, and no one can speak freely at a time like this. But, in an honest poll, I think you'd see a very nuanced opinion of Western influence.
We won't hear this because information is coming directly from CIA operatives. These quotes.
A lot of it is.
Yeah, these quotes that make heroes and martyrs, these events and stories that are told are coming directly from CIA operatives.
But what are you not seeing?
Everything.
You know what you're not seeing at all? And they would show this in the media if they had any images of large numbers of civilians, let's say in hospitals or whatever, mass graves or whatever.
Right.
If they had evidence of large numbers of civilian casualties, which, given that everybody has camera phones nowadays, if there were large numbers of civilians in hospitals right now, that would be recorded, that would be sent to the Western media, and they would put it on your I don't know if they would put like mass graves. They probably would. They would just blur out the bodies, but you're not seeing any of that. So that tells me that there aren't a whole lot of civilian casualties, which pretty much coincides and agrees with what I'm seeing on all of the different Telegram channels, that the Russians are taking great pains not to hurt civilians, although civilians will get hurt. When we invaded Iraq, in 13 days, we killed tens of thousands of civilians. In not 13 days, it was like 3 weeks, 4 weeks.
That's exactly what we're saying. And in the United States, when we invaded Afghanistan and Iraq, we completely destroyed their cultural and, government institutions. And it was just... Well,
Afghanistan was a little bit different. We didn't carpet bomb Afghanistan like we did Iraq in the amount of time. In Iraq, when we did the invasion, it was a literal carpet bombing. They destroyed all utilities, water, electric, disrupted the food supply. People died of starvation. People were dying of disease. It was just people were dying of infections because there were no antibiotics. Okay,
right.
What we
did
to Iraq.
We paid little mind to that. We didn't go to great lengths to make sure that civilians were looked after and given the proper treatment, and care, and evacuation.
Why should they, when the United States government controlled the media completely? Especially, this is before the internet, became as big as before social media. The United States the government completely controlled I heard somebody make a comment yesterday. You probably have to go pick up your daughter in a little bit,
Yeah,
right?
in a little
few
bit,
minutes. So I heard somebody, I think it was on the Gray Zone or one of those lefty anti-war channels, which I love so much. You know, the commies that I like to fuck with. One of these guys said that people in the, China and Russia, they are actually envious of how much control the United States government has established over its population through propaganda, through its media. And I can see that's just an opinionated statement. That's not a factual statement he made. I forget who made it, but I can see why that could be true. Well, I could see why that could be true because the way that they have control, it's really quite striking when you think that they've created 3 moral panics since March of 2020. We had the COVID lockdown, or you're going to kill grandma moral panic. Then you had the get vaccinated or you're an anti-vaxxer moral panic. And now you have the I stand with Ukraine. If you don't stand with Ukraine, you are a Putin apologist or whatnot. Moral panic. And the amount of the way they're pulling the strings of so many people, it's waning because I think they overdid it. And even the boomers will never figure it out because they just don't want to. But the younger people are figuring out. So I think they overdid it. And as the economy continues to collapse, people are gonna be more apt to question, the narratives. They're gonna be like, wait a minute, why am I getting poorer every year, every month?
Well, that's what people are really going to notice. That's what they're going to respond to. For a minute, I was thinking they're actually going to start to recognize the narrative and the lies breaking down. Because I think Vladimir Putin is probably aware that everything they're doing, they have to be very careful not to let Western propaganda demoralize their soldiers or turn the world against them. So they're going to great lengths really to make sure that these civilian populations are taken care of through the UN, through working with humanitarian corridors and programs through the UN, where these people are, where they're documenting this. And the more that I see it, it seems like there's a clear-cut plan, and they're being a little more transparent. So they're definitely are aware of the propaganda.
They look to have been very competent in this military operation, invasion, whatever you want to call it. And I dare say the United States could never pull off an invasion like that with such competence and such gentleness. No way in hell. And
without leaving a power vacuum behind and just, like I said, destroying everything. So
we just destroy everything. But right now, the United States couldn't even pull off an invasion like they did in 2003 in Iraq. The leadership is completely fucking gone. There is no leadership in the United States. But they talk a big talk
too. We're losing credibility on the world stage at an alarming rate.
And that started with Iraq, actually. So that's why one reason, to me, the decline, it started more like back in, with the Iraq War, the second Iraq War. And there were huge anti-war protests in all over Europe. I remember I was in Germany at the time before I got shipped off to Iraq. I was on a base in Germany, and those Germans, they were at every military base in the rain. It could be freaking 20 degrees outside. They were out there holding up signs very politely. The Germans were very polite. They were very polite about it, but they had their signs, and then you had.
I was out there in Syracuse.
They had in Rome, was there the largest protest of all time, something like over 1 million people. I know in Britain they had one that was over 1 million people at once. 1 million people at once in London, and it didn't stop the British government from sending their troops there, but that was where the decline, at least our diplomatic reputation, started to fall apart, I would say. And it's just gotten worse from there. I think we're not even at the beginning of the decline. We are well into the decline at this point, and the momentum is getting to the point where I don't think it can be reversed at all. And it's not the end of the world or the end of our lives, because Britain was a empire and it declined, and I would say Great Britain is still a satisfactory place to live for most people in Britain, especially if you're an immigrant from the Middle East. Then it's a spectacular place to live. Okay, but same thing in Germany. Germany declined, got their asses kicked. It's still a fine place to live if you want the government to, if you want to suck the government's teats every day. That's a great place to live, But it's not, it's not the end of the world. But it's just the fact that Americans aren't going to get everything they want anymore. Like, Americans are no longer going to get the best and the greatest of everything. And we're not going to get the best cars, the best food, the best electronics.
And we can't shame people on a world stage to try to get that. I was going to say, how did, in 2003, how did shaming the French for not supporting our war efforts by changing the name, calling French fries, calling them freedom fries, and making fun of that was very effective, right?
When I was in Germany at the time, and we used to go to the German restaurant, and I would go, "I'd like some freedom fries."
Just fucking with people.
Oh my God. And they don't have much of a sense of humor over there, so that was funny. But and so so far as the biolabs, all I know is this. Here's the sequence of events I know is they were talking about the biolabs for a while. Alex Jones has been talking about it for fucking years.
His fucking head's gonna explode.
Yeah, he's like right. Alex Jones was talking about biolabs in Ukraine, I think literally like 10 years ago or something like that. So then you have they're starting to talk about it. And then I know Victoria Nuland did that slip up the other day where she answered a question that Marco Rubio didn't even ask of her. And she went on to say, Marco Rubio's question was, and he didn't say who, he said, are there biological weapons in Ukraine? Are there biological weapons there? He didn't ask whose biological weapons they were. He just asked, are there biological weapons? And she went on
saying that they were Ukraine.
She went on this whole long thing, which is right here on Forbes. Forbes is actually, this is not the same one, but Forbes is a good place to get stuff like that. Forbes breaking news on YouTube to get these little snippets from congressional hearings. So she went on to say something like, well, this, that, and the other, and we do have biolabs there, but I assure you they're not bioweapons labs. We have biolabs, but I assure you they're not bioweapons labs. And
so it was a pre-written response, most likely,
and she said,
it just was applied to the first question where it came up.
And she said, she went on. It's like, for some reason, she lost control of her ability to shut up. And she said, and we're very concerned that that the Russians might get their hands on them. And then people started asking the question, well, if they're just biolabs, just normal biolabs, then why are you concerned about the Russians getting their hands on them? What are you concerned about? And she said, we're concerned about them getting a hold of materials and releasing materials and causing a false flag. Well, hold up. What's in those biolabs? And then I've heard rumors. I've heard rumors
research and data.
Yeah,
that's what the mainstream media has tried running as cover for their,
so something
deception
tells
and
me,
fact-checking.
Something tells me that there was stuff in those biolabs that would make Wuhan look like fucking, Disneyland. Okay, and I've heard rumors that there is anthrax in those biolabs. I rumors, and just rumors, I don't know if they're fact, and bubonic plague. And that's a cool snippet from history. The United States stole research from the Japanese after World War II about weaponizing bubonic plague from Unit 733. So, but besides that, the fact that we have dangerous bio labs, whether they're bioweapons labs or not, doesn't matter.
Yeah, and we've
on
had
the
no
border.
Transparency on that. There's been no origin investigation into COVID, and there's no accountability. There was nobody that was like, okay, we're gonna have such and such, an audit or an investigation. There's a public outcry. These kind of things can't happen. This is unacceptable. There was nothing, no public outcry
No.
for, hey, you motherfuckers, you did this to the whole world. What are your assurances that this is not going to happen again?
Well, that's because the American.
It's just
That's because
gaslighting and.
that just goes to show you that the American people, in actuality, have no voice. Have no voice. I mean, because don't tell you. You're not going to tell me that most Americans wouldn't be concerned if they knew about it, first of all, that we have bioweapons labs anywhere after what happened in but normal Americans don't have a voice. The only people that have a voice are idiot fucking libs from the West Coast and New York who spend 6 hours a day on Twitter. Those are the people who have the voice. That's whose voices are magnified across the internet, and the networks are irrelevant anyway at this point. But so then after Victoria Nuland admits to this the other day, which people were just shocked, and Marco Rubio was visibly upset, which could tell you something about Marco Rubio. Why would he be upset? If I was Marco Rubio, I would be happy. If it was me and I was an honest politician, I would be happy that Victoria Nuland disclosed that for the American people to know.
Yeah, like he was a master interrogator or something.
He was trying to lead her, and she literally went off script, and it's like, did she do it on purpose? Who knows? Maybe it's a really big problem, and she's really concerned, and she thinks it's time to spill the beans. Maybe she has a conscience left.
A moment of conscience there.
Then the next, yesterday, the Russian foreign minister, who's this very nice looking Russian lady, by the way. She came, or spokesperson for the foreign minister, because Lavrov is the minister.
Lavrov,
he is a brilliant diplomat, by the way. But she comes out and she went on this tirade at the UN or something, and she said she was really upset. So you could see her thing on her speech, and she said, "We found documented evidence of bioweapons research on our border." Now, think about that. Imagine if Russia had opened up bioweapons labs
in Mexico or
in
something.
Monterey, Mexico, or Windsor, Canada, or anywhere near the United States. In Cuba, in Venezuela, they would have a problem with that, which I could see it actually happening in Venezuela. But if the United States found out about that, it would be all over the news, first of all, because they would want to build public support for some sort of direct action to take care of that. And it would be a big deal. So I think that personally, just after having heard that yesterday and seeing what's going on, I think that relations between the United States and Russia are done for good for quite some time. I would say for decades. I don't think there's any turning back from this whatsoever. So congratulations, Americans. You're getting what you elected. And if again, I always want to add the disclaimer that this wouldn't have stopped under Trump. Those bioweapons labs have been in Ukraine for almost a decade, probably at least 8 years, ever since maybe 7 years, who knows? But they've been there for years. They didn't spring up overnight. They were there during Trump's presidency. So this would have happened under Trump. Either they wouldn't have told him. I wouldn't be surprised if they would have kept it from Trump, that there were bioweapons. But Trump wouldn't have cared.
Department of Defense tend to
Trump
hide
supported
things like in Syria from Trump.
Trump supported the neo-Nazis. He was all about it. And then Congress had he was all about it. Obama, he supported them at first, but he didn't know how bad they were. And then he stopped and he said, well, it's not going to be possible for me to race bait as much if I support neo-Nazis now, is it? So he stopped. And then when Trump came in, he said, send them the weapons, lethal aid, okay? And then Congress...
Trade deal?
It was more of an aid package. And Congress, because it was Trump, came out in 2018 and said, no, we can't do this anymore. So then they had a pang of conscience, even though before Trump was president, they were pushing for Obama to do it. and people in the State Department and all over were pushing Obama to do it. And he sent them aid. He just didn't send them weapons. By the way, to clarify, Obama sent them plenty of aid, plenty of money, and I'm sure, and that was in public. This is publicly known knowledge. Covertly, I'm sure they were sending him aid. He just wouldn't do it publicly. Okay, so I'm not saying the Obama did it out of a ethical or moral concern. It was a political concern. It was, I'm Obama. I'm the black president. African American president. I am the, BLM guy, and, let, Ferguson riot because we have frustrations and the social justice. So I can't do this publicly, right?
Right, supporting neo-Nazis and thugs behind the Zelensky regime.
I'll tell you what,
back
though.
then,
I'd take.
Poroshenko.
I don't know. I would take maybe. I don't know. It's hard to say if I would take Obama over Biden, but I'm almost willing to say I would take Obama over Biden, and that's saying a lot because at least he had a head on his shoulders, at least a good head on his shoulders. But anyway, take it away. Anything else? Because you probably have to pick up your daughter in a minute, right?
I was just looking at the time. Yeah, I gotta head out to go and pick her up.
All right, you're running late, right?
Yeah, there's so much we gotta catch up on. We gotta do this more often.
Okay, we'll do it again later on this week. And I'll upload it right now. All right?
Okay. Yeah, sounds good.
Right.
Thanks for
See you
having me
later.
on.
All right,
Bye.
bye.